Hey, folks, Zach Osterman here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. It is Mind Your Banners for Friday, November 28th, 2025, except we're doing it on Saturday, November 29th, 2025. Please forgive us. We did not fit the post-game podcast in last night. To be completely frank with you, it was an incredibly late night anyway. Mike, I think I dropped you off a little before 3:30. And I got home right around 4:30 from Purdue. So we pushed this to today, and it's probably for the best we did because there was a result from this from today that was going to make, I think, a lot of difference to how we frame these conversations that we're about to have. That result was obviously Indiana 100, Bethune-Cookman 56.
Everybody.
What were your takeaways from that game?
I think a way to sum up this first 7 games and this game today, they scored 100 again. So they have scored 100 in as many games as the entire Mike Woodson era in 7 games under Coach Darren DeVries. I mean, it's a different style of offense. It's a different brand of offense. It's a different team. Look, it's not perfect yet. But when it works, man, is it pretty. Like today, Tatum Connerway grabbed a defensive rebound, ran out the floor, went in for a drive, no look behind the back pass to Connor Enright at the top of the key. He flips it to Tucker. Tucker hits a three-pointer. Nobody missed a beat. It was like you draw it up, and it was like perfect. There was oohs and ahs in the crowd, and that's sort of like the team has bought into Darren DeVries's the unselfishness of the system he's built, or he relies on, and that's kind of the most clear thing you can see. And yes, there's mistakes. Yes, it's not perfect. It's not the cleanest thing at times, but look, they've got the fundamentals down, and I think that they're just going to keep trending upwards as they get more experience playing together and more experience with him as their coach.
I actually thought this week, and believe me, a joke to say we're not going to talk that much about basketball, but we really didn't talk about basketball at all last week.
And we won't probably get a chance before the Minnesota game on Wednesday because of all this going on. So,
like the last week's results, I think were noteworthy to me. Like, number one, they weren't great against Kansas State, but like nobody done that to Kansas State. Nobody had nobody had. I think that was the lowest number of points Kansas State had scored all year. And more than that, like nobody had been able to just get Kansas State out of its offense and keep it there for long stretches.
The fewest points PJ Haggerty had scored since January 30th last year. I mean,
and like
check.
Like, it was just, and by the end of the game, Kansas State was resorting to hero ball, ISO ball. It just kind of like you thought that was going to be, and I don't think this team's a defensive juggernaut. But if you think back to where we thought this team was defensively in July and August, to see them do that to a team that has no defense to speak of, but is very good offensively, I thought was impressive and noteworthy. It's worth pointing out Kansas State is 23 places better off right now in KenPom than Marquette. And then actually, I think I told you this last night. We were having a conversation with Adam Kuffner up at Purdue, Sam King. I thought this game would be kind of tough for Indiana. I didn't think they'd lose it. But it's a new
freezing cold takes.
Like I'll own it. It said like it's a noon tip. It's kind of a sleepy time. College football is dominating everything. Of course, like Indiana's fan base. It's emotional energy to Friday night. Bethune-Cookman had a couple. Like they took Auburn to overtime. They only lost by 9 at Dayton. A lot of their losses to like similar opponents in terms of level this year have been by like 4, 5, 6, 7 points, etc. Like I thought they would kind of keep it close. And I mean, Indiana was up like 38-18 with like 5 minutes left in the first half. And that was it. Like there was no, it was very workmanlike.
It was a very light crowd. One of the lighter ones I've seen, which makes absolute sense in terms of the timing of the game, where it came after the football season, the holidays and everything. They did. I don't know if it was intentional, but it probably wasn't intentional. The opening play was a 4-point play from DeVries, and Tatum Connerway had 2 like underhanded circus shots right after that to sort of, I don't know, wake everybody up and sort of, say like, hey, we're here, we're gonna make this entertaining, and they never sort of pulled back on the gas pedal, and they just kind of kept going. And so I think the crowd was with them throughout, and I think that helped. I think the way to wrap this conversation up to move on to football is at this point in the year, last year, not to keep bringing back to Mike Woodson, but I think it's apt here. They were this team. You were coming back from the Bahamas and had just watched them lose to Louisville and Gonzaga and look completely lost and hopeless. And it was like, this season is going to possibly get pretty ugly. That's where you kind of felt at when they got back from that trip. And I think you're feeling kind of the complete. It's a 180. I think you're feeling the complete difference. You look at this team. Like I said, I view this after this 7 games. I'd be shocked if this team didn't make the tournament.
Yeah. Yeah.
Last year, I think you probably came home. After that Gonzaga game, you were like, I'd be shocked if this team makes it through the season, and they didn't. Or Mike Woodson didn't. And so I think that's kind of how you compare it. I just think it's because look, November 29th last year was the Providence game in the Bahamas.
I mean, right now, Ken Pomeroy has Indiana at 22-9, 12-8 in the Big Ten, and I think that sounds like right at what I think this team will be.
Yeah, because we kind of said the 20 wins was the magic number, and they could afford to lose, 2 of the non-conference games. Their 2 toughest ones are now coming up. They've done the rest of the work, and they set themselves up well, really well for what's to come.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, and I think, put it this way: there's a very real chance this is the best. If we allow for the idea that Mike Davis's quote unquote first season is that interim season, there's a very real chance this is the best first season for an Indiana basketball coach since Bob Knight in 71-72. I think, and if you listen, if you want to flip it the other way and say that, well, Mike Davis's true first season was his first season as full head coach, fine. They went to the national championship game. I'm not taking that away from them. But certainly at least it's Kelvin Sampson. They won 21 games, 22 games, something like that. 2006, 2007, they won 21 games. They went to the second round of the NCAA tournament. They lost to UCLA by 5. So this team is ahead of where I think we both thought they would be, basically. And I think Darren DeVries and his team deserve a lot of credit for that. You want us to talk about football. We want to talk about football. Indiana versus Ohio State, 8 p.m. Saturday, Lucas Oil Stadium, Indianapolis. The game is on Fox. Am I correct in saying that? I believe it's on Fox. I will check that while we are on air here. It's sponsored by Discover. I know that's what everyone is most concerned about. Indeed, will be.
Do you know the name of the trophy? Do you know the name of the trophy offhand?
The Amos Alonzo Stagg Trophy.
Very good.
Yeah, I caught that in skimming the email from the Big Ten. It's worth saying this is 1 versus 2. That is history for this game. This is only the 3rd time in the history of the Big Ten championship game. Both teams have been ranked in the top 5. I looked this up before we started. Number 4, Michigan State versus number 5, Iowa in 2014. And then last year when I believe Penn State was number 3. So that was 1 versus 3. This is the first 1 versus 2 in the Big Ten since the game of the century between Ohio State and Michigan in 2006. I'm not picking Mike up from Chicago. Absolutely not. And this is the first 1 versus 2 in a conference championship game that I could find anyway, since Florida and Alabama did it back-to-back in the Urban Meyer, Nick Saban years in the SEC. Listen, we've been waiting. I guess what I'm trying to say here is we have been waiting for this matchup in this season, all season. I do think it is fair to zoom out and say what we're going to get Saturday college football on this stage does not get very often.
No, but I think we should start. I mean, let's because we've
already started.
No, we got to talk about the state of the old Oak and Bucket rivalry here.
No, we really don't.
Well, no, I really want your perspective. You have more historical perspective than I, and I can look at the numbers. Like,
this is why people want me to get a new podcast host. I hear
no. This is
lots of people.
They want you off the podcast and me to just do it. No, but like seriously, like because once we move on to Ohio State, we got to wrap the bow on the season. They got there by winning 56-3 over Purdue, and they have now won by a combined score of 122-3 over the Boilermakers last 2 years. It's as dominant of a stretch in the rivalry as in history, going back to the 1890s. There's been nothing that rivals this, back to, until, like the first couple of years of the rivalry when it was like 66-0, those first 3 years. You've covered a lot of these games that were very meaningless. They're very ugly. What do you make of these things? And did you find Kurt Cignetti's comments, like they voided each other, basically? They were ships of the night. Barry Odom didn't, I think, really reference Indiana or what Indiana did or what anything that happened in the game in his post-game press conference. Kurt Cignetti was complimentary and said he's going to get that thing turned around and didn't pile on and said, they hit rock bottom just as I happen to be here. It's not, it's not permanent. What do you make of this?
I mean, I think it's probably the biggest schism in the rivalry in its modern history. I mean, and like there are people, it kind of depends on like who you talk to as to sort of what what the rivalry means on both sides. Like Purdue has more football heritage, if for no reason other than just because of its quarterback lineage. Purdue obviously also has more recent success. On the other hand, and I'm not picking on Joe Tiller at all, but like Joe Tiller's best season at Purdue was 9-4. I think he did that twice. Yeah. He comfortably owned the rivalry with Indiana. The year they go to the Rose Bowl, they beat Indiana 41-13. But they're the number 17 team in the country. Like it is not what Indiana, like Purdue in its modern history has not been what Indiana has been. And of course, as we all know, Indiana certainly hasn't. Like my point is this is the highest
of the highest for either team.
Either of these teams has really risen its station in college football more widely in the modern sort of version, the modern sort of, the modern installment of the series. And I'm sure if I had a better working knowledge of Purdue history, because I can't go back through every single year, I could find you years where, you should have counted this or what about that. But like in general, this is about as high as either of these programs has climbed. Certainly in like if you want to say like, I guess like if you want to call like modern college athletics, I think it's probably fair to say post the Regents decision in 1984, which is what starts to trigger a lot of these decisions that see, so many schools go from independence to conferences. We start to really empower the conferences as these like these entities that have more, financial and political authority even than the NCAA. All that arguably starts really with the Regents decision in 84. Neither of these programs has ever been has ever been so singularly good. And I mean, I'm going to be honest, like, again, I don't have the time. If you'd given me a chance, geez, I could have researched.
You know we were going to talk about Purdue and Indiana?
No, I thought we were going to talk about the Big Ten championship game right after we talked about IU Bethune-Cookman. But I don't know if there's been a time in the history of either of these programs where they've lost 18 straight conference games.
Where one of them has, yeah, no.
Okay, so like, yeah, so like the point is it's happened, but like it is historic, at least to a certain degree, that like that is very unusual. And then you have that juxtaposed against a period in time when I don't think like all the NIL rev share stuff is going to calcify, but I think that I do think that the schools that were really going to like jump up a couple of levels by being really clever and aggressive with NIL, player compensation, how they use the portal, etc. I think that door might have closed. Like I think we've because what happens is everybody else learns what the best practices are, right? I think the idea that like Purdue, I would be surprised if Purdue is 2-10 and 0-9 in the Big Ten next year, but the idea that Purdue can suddenly close this gap as
they're going to
wide
do a
as it
Cincinnati
opens
is not going to, yeah. But
is
one
just
interesting thing I think about this too is that you have Southern roots and SEC roots, just from that part of the country, and you see we got to see what these rivalries mean and how the fan bases and coaches and players go sort of a little nutso. You have Egg Ball. We still haven't had the Iron Ball. At least I don't think. I have not slept, so maybe that happened this morning and I missed it. But the heated nature of these rivalries, and I don't think, and you can maybe disagree, I don't know, but Cignetti, and I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, and this is my opinion of what he kind of I view his, does not care much or put much weight into rivalry games. And
no, I don't think he does.
And if you were an SEC coach, and if Auburn or Alabama,
here's the thing I would throw
Ole
back in
Miss
your
had done
direction.
this to Mississippi State, I don't think Lane Kiffin would be like, man, I think they're going to turn it around, or whoever the coach is that replaced Lane.
Yeah,
Kiffin.
but I think like some of that is. I mean, listen,
you don't kick a guy when he's down, but I'm just saying, like,
no, but like, let's not forget that his first night on the job, he got on a microphone in front of a sold-out Assembly Hall and said Purdue sucks. So that's not. I think Kurt Cignetti is opportunistic about weaponizing the rivalry when he needs to. It's also worth saying I don't know how many, at least as a head coach, how many like fierce rivalries he's been exposed to. Like he didn't, that is
Liberty.
What? Liberty? Yeah, Liberty. Jamie Chadwell. I mean, seriously though, that is probably one of the
Coastal Carolina.
The strange features of sort of his head coaching journey is that like he didn't spend 20 years inside the Iron Bowl the way Kirby Smart did, or back when like the one that I always grew up with that everybody loved was that Vince Dooley played at Auburn and coached at Georgia, and Pat Dye played at Georgia and coached at Auburn. Like that sort of insular stuff exists, right? Bo Schembechler played for Woody Hayes. That intensity of Tom Allen. Tom Allen's dad was a high school football coach in Indiana. Like the bucket game meant the world to Tom Allen. I just think Cignetti didn't get exposed to a ton of that. And I think he does too have the ability, that a lot of coaches do to just sort of compartmentalize it. And sometimes that's going to sound like he's demeaning his rival by saying they're not important. Sometimes it's going to be him just saying like, I'm not going to make any headlines tonight. I'm just going to praise Barry Odom. Whatever I think about where they're going, it doesn't really matter. I mean, a lot of it, frankly, and I'm not saying it's a permanent state of affairs, but I do think Indiana's earned this right for now. A lot of it, frankly, is just like, if you're Indiana, like Purdue's not your problem. Like you and Purdue are not fighting the same fight. You are not equals right now, and that we know that can change. Look how quickly it changed. Within 12 months, from Purdue being the game that ultimately proves to be Tom Allen's last, all the way up to what eventually, Kurt Cignetti does with Indiana in the bucket game in his first season. But the point is, the rivalry has rapidly gone to a place where these two programs just aren't fighting the same fights. And I think you can see last night, like we talked a lot about, last year Indiana was running up the score against Purdue. They had to, the fake punt, Curtis Rourke with two touchdown passes in the fourth quarter. I saw Purdue fans, I think it might have been my friends over at Boiled Sports, which is a really good Purdue fan podcast. And they basically said like Indiana was up 28-3 at halftime because they were unintentionally struggling. Like they weren't at their best in the first half, but they were at 28-3, and they won 56-3 because they intentionally slowed down. The perspective I saw most in terms of what Indiana did, the perspective I saw most consistently from Purdue fans was it could have been worse if Indiana wanted it to be.
Well, yeah, I think most of the comments today from the stories I posted kind of about the rivalry and the game were acceptance on Purdue's side that they are down bad. And that was just more of what they had seen or expected. And I think it's a good spot to end because it kind of transitions to the Ohio State game. So I thought the biggest takeaway from the game itself, and look, there wasn't a ton, obviously. I mean, Alberto Mendoza had better numbers than Fernando Mendoza, obviously crazy. But Kurt Cignetti's comments about them finding the killer instinct and then building back some momentum, I felt like they kind of had lost. Obviously, you win the emotional Penn State game, but you put yourself in a position to lose everything. And Wisconsin did not look great. And Kurt Cignetti kind of admitted this is a team that was physically and mentally fatigued. And how did they respond coming out of the off week? Like you said, it wasn't the prettiest of starts for Mendoza mostly. And because I thought the defense played pretty well and the running game played pretty well. But in that middle eight and then the third quarter, that was the hallmark of Kurt Cignetti's teams in Bloomington, the killer instinct, we're going to put this team away. They hadn't done it in a long time. And Cignetti sort of talked about that as much as making the Big Ten championship. And I think it meant a lot to him to see that, because obviously you're going into the stakes get higher. Obviously it's Ohio State now, but then the playoff itself is looming. I thought that was a key thing to this game, that, yes, you beat Purdue, a bad Purdue team, you beat them soundly, but how you did it kind of mattered because of what came before and because of how tired this team was. Like everybody, they had 5 injuries and all the things were piling up. They looked a little slow. Didn't really look like that on Friday night.
I think if we can transition from Purdue smoothly into Ohio State, I think the biggest thing that I felt like watching that game against the context of what, I don't know when you decided the game was over. I think for me, it was the Kalon Black touchdown, the one that made it 21-3.
When Indiana's bus got to the stadium.
But, once I started kind of evaluating that whole game and all the decisions that were being made and everything I was seeing through the lens of how is this going to affect next week, I just couldn't get over how much fresher Indiana looked. And I sort of asked the question to myself, how much can you get out of a bye week? Because it's sometimes all you need is a week. Sometimes you just need a week. Obviously, for some guys to get treatment. And, we saw Drew Evans warm up but not play. Khalil Benson played some with the twos.
Yeah, we'll have to ask about that on Monday.
Yeah, but even then, he wasn't doing as much. He was playing without anywhere near the snap count he probably would have had. Elijah Surratt got back in, obviously. I thought, the group that I thought looked freshest was the defensive line. Just looked, opponent allowed, that was the best that group had looked since the Oregon game. And if we talk a little bit eventually about the Ohio State matchup, how Indiana fares at the line of scrimmage defensively is going to be one of the big questions I have about this game. Just everywhere other than Fernando Mendoza probably just struggling with the cold, which is maybe a question he has to answer long-term in his own career, but is not going to be a concern between now and the end of Indiana's season, whenever and wherever that comes. It looked like they really got a lot out of the bye week mentally, physically, that this was a team that was able to really reset itself in the ways that it needed to, obviously to beat Purdue, but even more importantly, to get fresh for Indianapolis.
Yeah, and like I said, I just thought and Kurt Cignetti, the way he frames his press conferences a lot is the way you could tell what's on his mind. And he made that point at the start. He came back to it a couple of times. Like I said, I think there was questions and he mentioned a couple times, which I found interesting. And maybe it's not about specific players, but just sort of generally, because he might just be trying to fight this for the future. He mentioned selfishness, multiple times about trying to. They don't have a lot of it, but in a roster with 100, I think his exact quote was in a roster of 105 people, there's some there. There's always going to be, and as the spotlight gets brighter, as more national attention gets put on this team, as you play in these big moments against Ohio State, you could be, the top 4 team for the playoff and get a bye. I thought that was interesting. And the idea of he's really trying to keep this locker room together to make sure there's no sort of fractures or anything like that kind of going into this big moment. Because I think when you flip it and what Pat Coogan and what Fernando Mendoza said Pat Coogan talked about, and what Aiden Fisher talked about. Because I thought the quote about the biggest takeaway I had from all the post-game stuff was Aiden Fisher's comment, a like-minded team is a dangerous team. And that's sort of maybe, when we've kind of looked for, he said it kind of as a throwaway to start of a longer answer, but everybody's trying to say, what's the secret of the last 2 years? What's the secret of this team's success? How did this program get turned around? And I think that might be the answer, that you have a roster full of guys, and it's kind of like the chip on the shoulder, but yeah, what do you do with it? And it's all these guys are like-minded, of shared purpose, and that's how they've done this. And that's what Kurt Sigetti was talking about. We've got to maintain that. And maybe saw it getting away from them a little bit, or maybe he was worried. What did he say last year? Sometimes he worries ahead of time and kind of maybe makes something happen. But he's a worrier. But he mentioned that
he's talking about trap games, and he said you can manifest that stuff into existence by talking about it too much, worrying.
But he says sometimes he kind of worries like that. Like that's what he does. He thinks about those things and projects it out. And so but I think that's kind of when you talk about this team in this locker room going into this Ohio State game, when you are going to have a bit of a talent. This is, like a game like Oregon where you have talent deficit. You do, because they're recruiting from a different pool. That's what's important. And I think he recognizes it, and this team recognized it last night.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I think, I thought it was interesting that Fernando Mendoza went off on that tangent about rejects and
rejects and misfits.
Yeah, I think that if you kind of wonder where this team maybe gets its edge a little bit, especially in a game like this, and there'll be a lot of talk about last year's Ohio State game, and in fairness, Indiana is going to have to swallow that because they played the game and they lost it the way they did. But I think there is maybe an element of Indiana looking across the line of scrimmage and the motivation of this game being so many of those guys didn't we had to fight through all this stuff that so many of those guys didn't. Even Fernando Mendoza as an example, who was coming into the season was widely recognized as potentially a draft prospect and a highly
credit. I used your anecdote is a great one that you wrote in that story that you talked to his high school coach.
That's what I was about to.
I'm crediting you because I think it illustrates, because people are like, he's not overlooked. Coogan's not overlooked. But Hemby, I think what people don't know, obviously you'll talk about Mendoza, but Hemby was sort of pushed out at Maryland. Coogan was pushed out at Notre Dame. Or, he could have stayed, but they're like, we're not going to start you.
A lot of, most of those JMU guys.
And then those guys were more
probably
obvious.
Would have gone for a bigger offer in high school if they could have gotten one. Yeah. Stephen Daly at Kent State. Listen, I'm not saying the formula forever is to go get guys from, mid majors basically that have been overlooked. But I think that if you want to know where the motivation for this week comes from, I would not be shocked if some of it is all the way up to the head coach, frankly. A little bit of, we had to fight for all the stuff they were given. So don't let that change now. Sounds like something someone maybe is going to write this week at some point. Who can say?
Who goes big picture like that? I don't know.
A big picture. Let's
talk. But if you want to share, I cut you off, but I was trying to give you credit because that anecdote for it includes Mendoza too, and I don't think that's what people realize. And if you want to,
so basically, it was like his high school coach told this story because he I forget what all his offers were, but for a long time it was FIU, I think Fordham or Lehigh, maybe a couple Ivies, because obviously he was a really good student. Yeah. They finally got Cal to bite, but the anecdote I led with was basically his high school coach's name is Dave Dunn, and Dunn's had a ton of success. He's coached at the small college level, and he's won, I think, 3 state titles at Miami Columbus, which is where Mario Cristobal played. It's where Fernando Mendoza IV played with Mario Cristobal. And basically he was just begging college coaches that came through, give this kid a chance, give him an offer, he'll prove you right. And the anecdote that he went for when he said, I would love to call some of those people and kind of rub it in their face now, was that they what did he say that he said it was an ACC school. He wouldn't tell me who. He said it required a flight, so it couldn't have been Miami, but that Fernando went up and he threw for them and he was great and he looked great and he ticked all the boxes. And the only thing the quarterback's coach said to him was like, have a good flight home. That was it. And obviously eventually he winds up at Cal and I guess spoiler alert too. And I think I'm probably going to wind up writing this story next week, not like the week upcoming, but the week into the Heisman Trophy. I got a chance to sit down with Fernando and Alberto and talk to them just about growing up in the game together and playing together. And Fernando admitted that he had some really tough moments in high school where he was like his parents, he was like really just sort of like disconsolate and like, am I ever going to get, an FBS offer? Am I ever going to get an opportunity? Like, what do I have to do to earn one? So, I mean, yeah, I think that, listen, every football player finds that sort of edge and that motivation somewhere. I'm not acting like Ohio State players have never been doubted by someone somewhere at some point in their careers. But like when you hear people talk about misfits and rejects and you talk, a like-minded team can achieve anything. And you talk and you hear Curt Cignetti talk week after week about this team doesn't lose its edge. This team, keeps its edge. It keeps that chip on its shoulder. Like, especially in a game like this, I think that's where it comes from. I do. Now, the matchup itself, because I know you have not slept in quite a while, and I've got some other stuff I want to finalize. The thing, and obviously, I mean, I'm sure you have too. I've thought about this game a lot for the last few weeks, and the thing that I have not gotten away from more than anything else is that this will be the best defense either of these teams has seen this season by some distance. And both have seen some good defenses, right? Both have seen some like top 20 defenses, but truly like smothering, swarming, just championship level defenses. And this will be the best quarterback each of these teams has seen this season. Probably the best receivers too. We can look at the different positions throughout the week, whatever. But like these will be the two best defenses, and in particular defensive fronts that these teams have played this season or yet may play at all this season, period, as good as these two defenses are. And these are the two best quarterbacks that these teams have seen. And I think, this is a very simplistic way of thinking about it, but sometimes football can be a simple game. I think I would be surprised if we come out the other side of Saturday night and the team that has won those two matchups isn't the team that's won the game, basically.
The teams as lines play better and quarterback plays better, you think will win the game? You are going out on a limb. Holy cow. Wow. Just stop the podcast. I mean, I don't know if we can get any better. Hot takes or hot takes.
Football is a simple game.
Yeah, if you win every position.
There was an old Gary Lineker line about European football. Football is a simple game. 22 men battle for 90 minutes, and at the end, the Germans win on penalties. So
yeah, no, but yes, I think the team that has the better quarterback and the better line play will probably win the game.
I guess the better way to say it is it's hard to know who that's going to be. Like last year, you would have looked at Indiana and said, yeah, you're in Columbus. You haven't faced a team of this caliber athletically. We don't know what you're capable of. And I think it's I think it was fair to be skeptical then. And in the same way, I think it's equally fair in some ways to be skeptical of Ohio State now. Julian Sayin has not seen a front like this. Julian Sayin has probably not seen a cornerback as good as D'Angelo Pons in terms of, as much as Indiana's going to want to go one-on-one with somebody like Jeremiah Smith. I think I believe they played together in high school, did they not?
D'Angelo Pons and Jeremiah Smith?
Yes. So there's a, I guess the reason I find that like these matchups compelling is it wouldn't have been difficult for me to tell you what I thought about those matchups going into Indiana, Ohio State last year. I think it's a lot more nuanced and layered this year.
Well, because the last year matchup is hard to look at and use as a base because like Indiana was kind of handicapped when they had the signal issue and the silent count issue. And threw off the rest of the entire game because they didn't really get it fixed till halftime, and the game was kind of over because you can't do it against Ohio State team with that talent, and you can't do it on the road. Like, the neutral field matters. The crowd makeup matters. I'm curious to see like what it all looks like what percentages, because like Ohio State fans probably bought tickets a lot earlier. But obviously, it's close for both schools, driving, obviously, but what that crowd looks like. And I don't think at least at a minimum, Indiana will probably have a disadvantage of the silent count issue that they had last year. Does that even the playing field completely? I think Drew Evans, he had the kind of the brace on the right ankle. What's his health? I mean, because like as we've seen, this line plays a lot better with Evans, and this is 2 years worth of evidence that Evans is sort of, I don't know, kind of a linchpin to that group at left guard. And then you've got the Benson situation on the other side. Like, Indiana's health on the offensive line is really a concern. Defensively, look, if we kind of looked it up last night because I was like, oh, is this their most tackles for loss? And no, they had the stretch of 3 games with double-digit tackles for loss. That was kind of at the start in the non-conference in Illinois. Like, if the line plays like it did last night or like it did earlier in the season, they can go up against anybody and create havoc. And that's sort of, I think, the blueprint for success. And that's exactly what they didn't do against Notre Dame and Ohio State. They let them dictate. Bryant Haynes even said kind of he got away from some of the stuff that worked, and he was talking about the Notre Dame game specifically. And that's, I think, maybe one key that I look at, not to get too deep into it because we'll talk about this later in the week. I don't think Coach Kurt Cignetti coached the same way he did in those games as he did the rest of the season. And are you busy?
I'm trying while you're talking to see if because we were asked to use BetMGM. I'm trying to see if they've already posted a line for this game.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm struggling so far. So
don't want to take you away from your reading. You look very engrossed. It was the best of times. It was, he's the guy could be talking about anything right now. It
was the best of lines. It was the worst of lines. It was the least posted of lines.
Yeah, but I thought Kurt Cignetti and Brian Haynes admitted in the Notre Dame game, they got away from some of the stuff that worked all season. I don't know if it was the talent on the other side that they were worried some of the things might not work and blow up in their face. And then it kind of did the opposite, that they made the mistakes anyway because they just weren't as aggressive as they might have normally been. And so what does that look like? But yeah, if Mendoza just outduels Sayin, then that's the easiest path to victory. But I think there's some things within that game that matter.
Well, yeah, no, obviously. I mean, I think, if we're doing this,
no idea what I said the entire time.
If we're doing this from the Ohio State side, I think we're asking, is Indiana's offensive line, for example, which has been banged up, and like we can sit here and say, well, they got Evans back on the field and they look fresher and Khalil Benson and blah blah blah, but like that doesn't change the fact that this will probably be the first time Drew Evans plays in more than a month, right? And what Khalil Benson appeared to be suffering from is not going to get fixed in 2 weeks. Maybe it's better, maybe it's healthier, but all it takes is getting rolled up on one more time, and it's right back to square one. And Ohio State's front is just as disruptive as Indiana's. Maybe, Indiana's defensive front might have a little bit more depth in terms of that disruption, the way Stephen Daly is playing, the way that obviously the tackles are playing. But is this the best offensive line Indiana's seen all season? Probably. So, I guess what I'm trying to say about this matchup in general is it does feel, and I think this gets back to your point about, Indiana probably learning some lessons about what to stick to in these games, what to make sure they don't get away from. Because it's really, I think fans hear coaches say that and they think like, well, why didn't you just go back to it? And it's like, well, but in the flow of the game, you're trying to balance so many different things. You're trying to balance.
And that's what you rep during the week. Like if you took out something in the game plan, you didn't focus on it.
And you're trying to balance adjustments, and you're trying to react to what the other team is doing. You're having to play time and score at least to a certain extent. It's not as easy as it sounds, but it can be more of an emphasis, right? Like it can be something Kurt Cignetti says through the week is like, one thing we learned last year is we do what we do and we don't get away from it. And we just keep driving until we get, another opportunity, whatever. CBS just threw up a Big Ten championship preview here on the Oregon-Washington game. and they do not have a line. So I'm just going to assume one's not officially been set yet. But I just think that the margins are smaller between these teams, both because of Indiana's improvement and also because this game's not in Columbus. I think the margins in this game are smaller, and I think it might be a little bit, to your point, more about can Indiana play the game on its terms? Because last year felt like, and I think, listen, I have said this, and I've said this for 12 months. I think Indiana probably should have gotten a little bit more credit for the way it played in that Ohio State game than it did. It was 7-7 near the end of the second quarter. Like, it should have been 7-7 going into halftime. They made two really uncharacteristic special teams mistakes. Suddenly it was 21-7, and that was it. You know, the game was completely defined by two very unusual special teams mistakes. That did not happen much that season. But let's be honest, Indiana for most of that game was not playing its game. They had a really nice scripted drive, and then after that, they could not move the ball. They could not get, Curtis Rourke any time to pass. I mean, he only had 18 attempts last in that game. Like that, I mean, that was how little they had the ball and how little faith they had in their ability to pass it. I think it's going to be important for Indiana in this game to run the ball at least as well as they did like at Oregon, for example. But I just think the margins are a lot smaller. I guess frame it this way, and I do want to wind us toward a conclusion here in a minute.
I have a question for you before we do this.
Well, let me ask you this, and then you ask me yours, and then we'll be done. Where do you think the line would be? Because I already had somebody ask me, and they said, do you think it'll be 14.5? Ohio State minus 14.5. Where do you think it'll open? Where do you think it'll? I think it's too high. Yeah, I agree.
Ohio State minus 8.5.
I think I said 9.5. So I said closer to a touchdown. I think is I think we're pretty much in agreement there.
And I think the neutral field has a lot to do with that too. I don't think you could go 2 touchdowns on a neutral field in a battle of undefeated teams. That seems high. I mean, Vegas knows though, so maybe we'll see. I don't know. My question for you: do you think this game decides the Heisman race? The winner, or maybe I'll frame it like this: does the winning team get the Heisman along with it, the Big Ten title?
Because the problem is I could see this game ending like 13-10.
So then, but then you think that there's a third party. Is that the third party scenario?
Like there's a
is that your most likely? So is that what your prediction would be if you were to predict who's going to win the Heisman? Now that we know these matchups, you could say, or is it Sayin, Mendoza, or the field?
Yeah, well, I think what you want to say is it either Sayin or Mendoza or the field, basically. Yes. That's what you're asking. I will lean on the betting markets here as much as anything, and I will say it's Sayin or Mendoza because I think that is what the odds makers have seen for a while. That is what, and we've talked about this, and should the Heisman work this way? No, probably not. Does it work this way? Frankly, yes. Like that is what sort of the narrative has kind of driven to at this point. And it's frankly like there's going to be Jeremiah Love chat this week, but it's also going to go into overdrive, right? Like this week, now that we know this is the matchup, we know these two teams are kind of on this collision course. And it wasn't like either, Sayin, I think was like 17-23 for 230 something, 3 scores and a pick in the Michigan game. Mendoza was not great at all in the Purdue game, still accounted for 3 touchdowns. He's now, I think, at 38, which leads, I believe, all quarterbacks in total touchdowns this season. So it's not like either one of them created a massive amount of separation from neither one of them.
Well, even if you look at that,
like if Mendoza had gone for 505 scores this week, and you would have felt like maybe that separated him somehow.
Well, if the 56 points was all Mendoza, you'd be like, man, he's
yes,
done.
Exactly.
But it's like he did almost.
Or if Sayin had gone out and thrown for 350 and 3 scores in Ann Arbor. Neither one of them did a lot to change your perception of them, basically, this weekend. Neither one of them was awful. Neither one of them was great. They just kind of kept chugging along the way they have.
But I would say I'd be surprised now if Mendoza is minus odds going into the Big Ten title game, because I do think because Sayin's win over.
I poked through that. He's plus 100, I think, on BetMGM, and Sayin was plus 350, maybe.
Because he went into the Purdue game minus. I just think it tightened up a little bit because Sayin should get credit threw an early interception, but did 3 touchdowns against a tougher opponent. At Michigan's a tough place to play, and they did head lost, obviously 4 in a row. So I think Sagan got a little bump, a little bump from this weekend, but I still think that means it's even. Like I just think it's so close.
Yeah. Mendoza, and again, we're asked to use BetMGM. Mendoza is plus 100. We do not encourage betting, by the way. I want to be very, very clear. Like all the disclaimers, this is not anybody encouraging you to go gamble.
The odds
we are just using this as a point of reference. Fernando Mendoza is plus 100. Sands plus 150. Jeremiah Love is plus 500. The only other player, and I don't know how you phrase this because I'm not enough of a gambler. The only other player with 4-figure odds rather than like into the 5 figures is Diego Pavia, who I have that game up here. He just tore off like a 25-yard run, but Vanderbilt is losing 21-14, and he's already from a pick in this game. He's plus 1,600. So,
I think just to mention Love one more time, he has tonight all by himself at 10:30. I mean, it's a late game because it's Stanford.
Yeah,
but I mean, if you want to put
but he's also not going to get next weekend.
I'm saying I know, but this is his last chance. But he has the audience, and with those other 2 guys not doing anything, this is his shot to sort of put his stamp on it. He's going to need to do something. I mean, like 200 yards and like 3 touchdowns to I think make it even or really make it close, unless things fall apart for both quarterbacks in the Big Ten title game.
It's gonna be fun.
So what I mean again, because I covered some SEC title game because I was in Auburn, and so the drive to Atlanta was very close. I never covered a good one. I think it was the years where Florida kept making it and just getting curb stomped by was it Alabama for a couple years there in a row.
I think there was the year there where Auburn got there but had like a bunch of injuries, and so like 3 of their 5 best players were out, and Georgia just kind of just smothered them.
So I mean, but we talk about history, and I asked for your historical perspective. As a reporter, you've covered a lot of bad Indiana teams. To have them being number 1 and number 2 going against Ohio State in the Big Ten title game, did you ever think that would happen?
No, of course not. I mean, just like, of course, I mean, like, seriously, go back to history, and maybe this is a good way to wrap this up. You might have lived in Big Ten country in 2006. That Michigan-Ohio State game, like, it felt huge. Yeah. Michigan was 2, Ohio State was 1. I think the final score was 42-39. There was a really, and this was BCS, so like you were arguing with the computer, but like there was a really compelling argument that they should have played for the national title because they were both undefeated going into that game. Obviously, the Big Ten did not have divisions or play a championship game at that point, but there was a really compelling argument that those are the 2 best teams in the country, even after Ohio State had beaten Michigan, and that they should get a rematch. And I think it was the Fiesta Bowl possibly that year. Mm-hmm. Ohio State wound up going and losing to Urban Meyer's Florida. Which actually, if you're looking for a podcast series to listen to, go back and listen to our good friends Bill Landis and Doug Lemerise. They did a piece about, they call it 25-year winter, which explained like why the Big Ten went 25 years without a national title. And they talk a lot about that period, that sort of mid-2000s period where the SEC created separation. Free shameless plug there for some friends. But like that's the last time the Big Ten saw 1 versus 2. I mean, that was 19 years ago. This doesn't happen very often. It has happened a decent amount in the SEC, basically. And then it'll happen, like I think the most recent 1 versus 2 was the Michigan-Washington national title game. That doesn't feel like it counts because those 2 teams were in a 4-team playoff that was seeded according to their national ranking. So you were already at a certain bias to get 1 versus 2, right? Like you were already that was already much more statistically likely.
It wasn't organic. It didn't happen organically.
Right. The Big Ten has only seen 3 top 5 matchups in the history of its championship game, and it has not seen 1 versus 2 in 19 years. This, I guess what I'm trying to impress upon people is this is no longer a story about did you ever think you'd see IU get here? This is a story about Indiana is making Big Ten history. And like it is like Indiana is making history that the conference, at least depending upon how the game turns out, will reference for a generation. And I think that is something really worth reflecting on, because I think, we're inundated every week with this top 5 matchup, this top 10 matchup, this top 15 matchup. Here come the latest playoff rankings. Who's in the Heisman race? Should Texas be in? Should Oregon be in? Should USC be in? Blah, 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 blah. Like, we sometimes lose sight of the fact that, matchups of this level are genuinely rare. And the reason why the college football at large has been talking about this game for weeks is because they were desperate to see these two teams play, because there is a justifiable feeling that these are the two best teams in the country. At best, I think the only other team that you can make an argument belongs in the same conversation with them right now is Georgia. Like, I think even Texas A&M, you already had some doubts about them because of their schedule. And I'm not saying they won't make they can't make a playoff run, but like, the first time you asked them to play a genuinely good team, they lost. These are arguably the two best teams in the country, and the Big Ten has not gotten 1 versus 2 in 2 decades. And we're going to get it Saturday night in Indianapolis, and Indiana is a part of that. That is obviously remarkable given the history of Indiana football, but it is also just remarkable, full stop, for Big Ten football.
There you go. There's a hot take.
Hot take. Any other business? You look.
I'm going to answer Agent. I think it was Agent All-Star asked. I do have DVDs. They're not in this room. They're packed away because there's no space. These are all video games. There's books in the corner over that way. But these are all video games. Sega, Genesis, Nintendo.
I'm glad we straightened that out.
N64.
That's a very good way to end this.
PlayStation, and then more modern. Xbox is off screen over here. I'm just trying to. They ask, you got to answer. If they ask you a soccer question, I'm sure you'd answer. How's Liverpool? How's their team? How's the podcast team? Dreamcast. Oh, Dreamcast is there. Dreamcast is there, and that's deck.
There you go.
I don't know what Dreamcast is.
I had a buddy who bought a Dreamcast from Japan just so he could get it 6 months before it was released in the United States. All the games were in Japanese and had to be like hacked open, basically.
Yeah, nice. And that was a system that you could burn discs, like regular CDs. They had no protection. Mm-hmm. That was good. Good. Yeah. The glory days.
The glory days are back, baby. It's 1 versus 2. That's where we're going to wrap. That's a segue into the end. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. This is not a video game pod. I'm sure we could get Mike to do one of those. We'll have a lot of coverage coming this week. Obviously, Curt Cignetti speaks tomorrow. That's part of like the Big Ten setup. He also does his weekly Monday press conference. We'll be there. There's a lot coming. Mike's going to be in Minneapolis midweek because basketball still has a fascinating week itself at Minnesota. And then, of course, we will be doing the double dip with Indiana, Louisville, and Indiana, Ohio State on Saturday. But
what time did you make reservations for St. Elmo's in between the games?
We will not have time between the games, brother. I have bad news for you.
We get it on our walk. We
will be eating the steak like by hand on the walk between Gamebridge and Lucas Oil Fieldhouse. I'm sure we will see some of you up there. I know you're all excited. It should be an awful lot of fun. For the Indianapolis Star, for the Bloomington Herald Times, he's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. This has been Mind Your Banners for November 29th, 2025. Thank you so much. We will talk to you soon.